On our program tonight, the Prime Minister faces a continuing barrage of questions about Canada's COVID vaccine plan on a day when Great Britain becomes the first country to approve a vaccine and will begin giving the shots in a matter of days. We'll get the latest from London, and MPs will debate Canada's vaccine preparations. And the federal government acknowledges it will not meet its target to lift long-term boil water advisories in First Nations. I'll speak with the Minister of Indigenous Services about that broken promise and the new plan. But we'll begin tonight with the latest news on the push for a COVID-19 vaccine in Canada and more questions for the Trudeau government after Great Britain announced today it has approved the Pfizer vaccine for emergency use and will begin administering it to the population in Britain next week.
This is unquestionably good news. It's very, very good news. But it is by no means the end of the story. It is not the end of our national struggle against coronavirus.
Well, the news out of the UK only amplified the criticism in this country over the Liberal government's efforts to acquire and distribute the vaccine.
Quote, what China did is they got what they needed from Canada and they stopped the vaccine shipment. This neutralizes the ability for Canada to participate in developing the vaccine, end quote. This is the assessment of a leading intelligence expert on how the Liberal government got played by China. Why did this government bet our nation's health, our economy, on a partnership that it was told was against our national security interests?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Speaker, once again, the Conservative Party is just making things up. We actually secured the broadest range of vaccine potentials. We knocked on every door to make sure that Canadians would maximize their chances of getting an effective vaccine when they came through. Yes, when CanSino withdrew, we went from potentially 8 deals with vaccine makers to 7 deals with vaccine makers. But those 7 deals that we have cover the best portfolio of any country in the world and more doses per citizen than just about any other country. That's the leadership we've shown. That's how we have Canadians' backs.
There will be 3 ways of vaccinating people: hospitals, vaccination centres, and in the community with GPs and pharmacists. Around 50 hospitals are on standby, and vaccination centres in venues such as conference centres or sports stadiums are being set up now. This is with regard to a COVID vaccine that's being released to the public tomorrow. I wish we could say that here in Canada. Instead, we have to congratulate our friends in the United Kingdom for getting their act together. So the question is this: when will the Prime Minister give that exact same information to Canadians?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, every step of the way we have relied on experts and scientists to give us recommendations on how to move forward on a rollout of vaccines right across the country. We've worked closely with the provinces and territories, and we will continue. We put the Canadian Armed Forces Major General Danny Fortin in charge of the logistics of rolling out and coordinating with the provinces and territories on vaccines. Right now, as we speak, Health Canada is looking at 4 different vaccine candidates that are leading around the world and that we have signed for tens of millions of doses for. Canadians will be covered on vaccines.
So it has been another day of the federal government on the defensive over its vaccine plan. The federal health minister did tweet today that Health Canada's review of the Pfizer vaccine should be completed soon. Let's bring in 3 members of Parliament to discuss the latest developments on all of this. Adam Van Koeverden is an Ontario Liberal MP and the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Diversity. John Barlow is an Alberta Conservative MP and member of the Commons Health Committee. Don Davies is a British Columbia MP and the health critic for the NDP, also a member of that Health Committee. Good to see you all, gentlemen. Thanks for being here.
Nice to see you too.
Mr. Van Koeverden, let me start with you. Now that Great Britain has approved the Pfizer vaccine for use in that country, British residents will start getting it as early, as some people are saying, in a matter of days now. What additional pressure does that put, if any, on Canada to approve this vaccine?
I don't think it's a matter of pressure so much as it's a good news story because, a quick approval time and turnaround from Great Britain means that we're likely to see the same thing here in Canada. Things like this take time. It's very important to make sure This is a safe vaccine and an effective vaccine, and it's the right one for Canadians. And this is a really good news story that Pfizer's been approved in the UK, because we've been working very closely with both Pfizer and the UK, and the NHS is, like Canada's healthcare system, a world-class healthcare provider. So it's a very, very positive step forward, and I'm very optimistic that our approvals will be done quickly as well.
Mr. Barlow, Health Canada issued a statement today as well saying it's doing its own review of the Pfizer vaccine, should be completed soon, is the way it's framed. Does your party support that position that Canada needs to do its own review, no matter how long it takes, but it sounds like it's coming quickly?
I think there can be some harmonization of regulations when it comes to the vaccine. I think every Canadian is on the edge of their seat, wondering when these vaccines are going to be available. And we've just heard too much of soon. Be patient. It'll be here. Too many mixed messages from the government, and Canadians are starting.
Hang on. Sorry, are you saying Health Canada should just borrow that information, that review information from Great Britain, and essentially rubber stamp it here?
No, I don't think they should rubber stamp it, but I think there is some harmonization, some of the regulations that have done that. A country like the United Kingdom, as Adam said, has a very strong healthcare system, and I think there are some things that we do not have to reinvent the wheel, so to speak, that there may be some ways to expedite the approval process here in Canada to ensure that those vaccines are available as soon as possible. But at the same time, obviously, you want to ensure the safety of Canadians.
So Don Davies, what's your view? Should anything change here in the approvals timeline in Canada because the British have now approved the vaccine for emergency use?
No, I think Canada has to do our own evaluation. That's the way we handle all drugs. I mean, whether something's approved in the States by the FDA or by Britain doesn't change the fact that Health Canada has its own responsibility to Canadians to do its own review. I do think there are some other points, though, that could be made. One is that in the U.S., Canadians may have seen a plane land last week with vaccine from Pfizer on U.S. soil, even though they have not received FDA approval. And Canadian law does allow that. We could be receiving Pfizer vaccine on Canadian soil pending Health Canada approval. And to me, it's smart policy to do that because the quicker we can get the logistics arranged so the vaccine is here and ready if and once it is approved, the faster we get vaccinations out for Canadians, which is what everybody's waiting for.
Although we know this particular vaccine needs to be stored at minus 70 degrees, and so to stockpile it in Canada, it doesn't appear that we're ready to do that now, are we?
Well, we have to do that sooner or later. I mean, the government talks about starting the Pfizer vaccinations in January. We have to have the freezer capacity. That's,
And it says it's got a bunch of the freezers now, and it's still waiting on more of them, but I'm not sure how much could be stockpiled. Yeah. Does that seem like an idea, Mr. Van Koeverden? Even before the approvals, stockpile it in whatever freezers we have now, try to get it in and be ready for when, on the assumption that Health Canada will follow the British lead and approve this vaccine.
Well, like my colleagues, Mr. Barlow and Mr. Davies, I am not a doctor or a health expert. I'm a politician. So I will leave the decision-making up to health experts and regulators, the people who have done such an extraordinary job for the last 9 months, but have always done a great job making sure that vaccines are available to Canadians. Because as we know, this is nothing new. There's a new vaccine for the flu every year. This is not the flu. I'm not drawing a comparison. But vaccines are available, and we do a good job in Canada with the provinces, vaccinating about 19 million Canadians every year with the flu vaccine. Again, not drawing a comparison between COVID-19 and the flu, as other people have. I'm just stating that the vaccinating Canadians is something that that Health Canada does extraordinarily well in partnership with our provinces, and I have the utmost confidence in our health officials to make those decisions.
Mr. Barlow, one thing we do know about Britain is they have a plan in place to distribute and administer this vaccine. The Prime Minister talked about it there today. They had a plan in place communicated to their citizens even before the vaccine was approved and will arrive. They know how it'll be distributed and who will get it. Do we have those answers in this country yet?
No, we don't. And with all due respect to my colleague, Mr. Van Koeverden, this isn't like any other vaccine. The Pfizer vaccine is very unique. It takes very specialized storage and transportation requirements. The United States also has Operation Warp Speed. They've announced have a logistics strategy to get the vaccine out and distributed to its citizens. We have nothing like that. And we've asked multiple times to the government, how many fridges do we have? Who's building them? Where are they going to be located? How is the vaccine going to be distributed? Who's going to be distributed? Who's going to get the vaccine first? We have none of these answers. And I think that would go a long ways to addressing the anxiety and the mental health stress that Canadians are under right now.
Mr. Davies, in part, the answer from government officials that, look, vaccine delivery in Canada is it's complicated. A rollout's complicated because there's a range of vaccines with different requirements for storage and distribution. We need the participation of the provinces. It's a more centralized health system in Britain, for example. So it's a more complicated challenge in Canada than in Britain, for instance. Do you accept that as a reason for the time it's taking to put this detailed plan in place and get it out to Canadians?
Well, of course not. I mean, you've got countries as varied as the UK and the United States, who doesn't have a national healthcare system at all, and Australia. All three of those countries are much further ahead than we are. Now, Canadians only care about one thing. They want to start knowing when they can start looking forward to getting these vaccinations. And I think they're entitled to some specifics at this point. It's December 2nd. This government has been saying over and over again that they expect to start vaccinations in as early as January. Again, that's weeks away from now. I think it's time that the government gave specifics to Canadians. On a different point, I wanted to say that our leader Jagmeet Singh today came up with, I think, a really important policy initiative, and that is to
you want Canada to get back to manufacturing vaccines.
Yeah, and I think that's important because although it's not going to be done in time, to produce vaccines, say in the next 12 months, the COVID pandemic has revealed a serious deficiency in Canadian vaccine and medication production. And I think it's something that all parties should join together with Mr. Singh and get to work on creating a Crown Corp so that we can have, domestic self-sufficiency. Australia is producing 30 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine. So the US is, the UK is, Belgium is. So I think it's a big flaw that Canada is not in this position because we really are at the mercy of multinational pharmaceutical companies.
Mr. Van Koeverden, let me go back if I can here to the issue of a plan and what Canadians.
If I could, I'd like to address what my colleague said.
Okay, let me ask a question, and you can weave an answer into it, and we'll take it from there. One of the government's answers this week has been, we don't have a date yet, so it's hard to know exactly what plan or what vaccine we might be getting. But let's forget the date. Why would the plan wait for a date? Why don't we know what'll happen no matter what date the vaccine gets here? So the day after the vaccine gets here, it gets stored here. Then on day 3, it gets transported in trucks or airplanes to different provinces. Wouldn't we know that already, no matter what date it gets here? Like if you buy a car and want to take a trip across Canada, you set the trip. Doesn't matter what day the car arrives. Once the car arrives, you head out on the trip.
I think that buying a car is different than procuring.
Well, of course it is, and I'm not trying to minimize
from 7 different companies. But I would like to correct my colleagues just on a couple of points. One, the number of freezers are available to Mr. Barlow. If he's wondering how many freezers we've procured, we have those numbers. More than 40
Health
freezers
Minister
have
won't
already been
announce
received
that,
by
Adam. He won't answer that question.
And she absolutely has, in fact, Mr. Barlow. It's just you're being quite selective with respect to which information you're willing to rely on.
We heard these numbers. Hang on, Mr. Van Koeverden. We heard these numbers at the news conference yesterday. They were revealed by Minister Nan. Here's how many freezers we have so far, and here's how many more.
These numbers have been. We've been forthcoming with the numbers with respect to the freezers, and the international media has been leaning on Canada's response and referring to Canada's response as the gold standard globally. So I refute
what we've talked about
here,
what we're talking about here today is answers to questions about whatever time the vaccine gets here, what is the plan for the day after it drops in Canada? How are we getting it to Canadians? Who will get vaccinated? When do we get those answers?
Well, those answers are forthcoming, and they require us to first work through the Health Canada regulations and approve this vaccine. And these vaccines, there are a number of vaccines, and we don't know which ones. The rollout system will be a lot different if it has to be stored at room temperature at -80, right? But we are prepared for all of these scenarios, all of the outcomes. We're more than prepared. And international media has been very, very forthcoming with that notion, both from Nature and other very well-regarded publications have all been saying that Canada's reaction and Canada's vaccine procurement has been gold standard.
Time is tight for tonight. I'm going to have to cut it off there, but thank you all for your participation. We'll continue to look for answers, and we'll continue to see the vaccine story unroll in this country. But thank you all for your time tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter.
Take care.
Well, let's take a closer look at the vaccine announcement in Great Britain today. Paul Waldie is the Europe correspondent for the Globe and Mail, and he joins me from just outside London this evening. Paul Waldie, first of all, thanks for joining me. It's good to talk to you.
Sure.
Look, a lot of people in this country want to know how the UK approval system managed to greenlight this vaccine so quickly, while Health Canada in this country is still reviewing the same data the British have reviewed. What can you tell us about the British process?
Well, the process here was faster than normal. And earlier today, during a press conference, the MHRA, which is the drug regulator, was at pains to say that the fast process didn't mean safety had been put at risk or compromised. What they did was a rolling review system. So they were actually analyzing data from Pfizer and BioNTech as its trials were going on. So one trial could carry on. One trial could finish, and another one could start almost at the same time. So it was a much faster review process. So they have been coming under a little bit of fire for the speed of this whole process, but they are insisting that no corners were cut and nothing was done that wasn't, that would compromise safety.
I mean, that's the same process that's underway at Health Canada. They're getting this data in real time. As other countries are getting as well, to be able to review it. So, I mean, how many doses will Great Britain receive, and how quickly will people in Great Britain get this vaccine? Has that been decided?
Yes, Britain's ordered 40 million doses, so this is a 2-dose vaccine, so that's 20 million people. The first 800,000 doses are expected to arrive here from Pfizer's plant in Belgium as early as this weekend. The government hopes to start inoculating healthcare workers, hospital staff in particular, as early as Tuesday, and then roll it out to the larger population, starting with care homes and then elderly people. So they're hoping to get this done over the next many months, but they're going to start in hospitals first.
All right, so Great Britain is clearly a couple of steps ahead of Canada here. In this country, the vaccine debate's been very polarizing, and this news out of the UK only amplifies allegations that the Canadian government has been slow to get the vaccines and approve the vaccines. What's the vaccine debate been like in Great Britain?
Well, the debate hasn't been so much about the vaccine here, because keep in mind, there is a vaccine, sort of a national program underway through Oxford University. Oxford has partnered with AstraZeneca. So the government is actually putting a lot more faith in that vaccine than it is in the Pfizer one or the Moderna one. In fact, that vaccine, the Oxford one, can be produced much more quickly at a lower cost, and it's easier to transport than the Moderna or Pfizer one, which require these super cold refrigeration processes. So the government is banking a lot on the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine. The debate here has been more around lockdown measures, social movement restrictions. England has just come out of a lockdown, the second lockdown today, in fact, and we're going back into a tiered system that's going to be tougher than the tiered system before the lockdown. And Boris Johnson has come under a lot of criticism from his own backbenchers about the new tiered system. In fact, last night, when the government put the new measures to a vote, 56 Conservative MPs voted against it. The opposition abstained, but had they not abstained and voted with the rebels, it would have been enough to scupper the plan. So Boris Johnson is facing quite a revolt within his own caucus, and some agitation across the country that England and the rest of the UK are still in some pretty tight restrictions.
Yeah. So what sort of how's this being viewed then as that conversation continues and sort of lockdowns begin to be? Is this viewed as sort of the magic bullet that it's all okay now in Great Britain?
Well, I think that's part of the concern on the government's part. Yes, they're happy that maybe this has deflected attention away from the controversy over the lockdown measures and the tiered system. However, Boris Johnson was quick to say, yes, okay, the vaccine is coming, but it is going to take many, many months, and we can't let up on the restrictions. So he's trying to play both sides here, being very congratulatory and very pleased with the fact that the vaccine has been approved, but also trying to insist that we can't let up, the country can't let up on the restrictions as well.
The Pfizer vaccine requires this ultra-cold storage, and Canada's preparing for that, and it presents some distribution challenges as well in a country, 40 times larger than Great Britain, and with a decentralized healthcare system such as we have in this country. But did the British have a plan in place well in advance for storage and distribution, and has it been well communicated? That's the big conversation in this country. No matter what date we get the vaccine, what is the plan to roll it out across the country? Did the Brits have a good plan in place even before they knew the vaccine was coming?
They've actually been working on a plan for quite a while, in fairness to the government, mainly because the AstraZeneca and Oxford vaccine has been such a big priority for the government here. They've been talking a lot about a rollout program. They want to start with hospitals because they can handle the refrigeration process, then move to care homes, then move to different age groups. They've been very specific about which age groups and how, using sports stadiums, doctors' offices, kind of the way the flu vaccine is handled right now at present. So, however, as you mentioned, there are logistical issues with this Pfizer vaccine. It does have to be stored initially in very cold temperatures. It can only be kept in a normal refrigerator for about 5 days. And if you take it out of that refrigerator, it's going to have to be used within 6 hours. So if you're trying to move it around, it's very tricky. It doesn't have a long shelf life outside of refrigeration. So it is a little more complicated to use. That's one reason why the government is banking more on the Oxford vaccine, because it can be stored in the refrigerator all the time. It doesn't require super cold temperatures.
Right. But is the overall sense there that the British government had planned for this day and this moment and that it's ready to roll this out to people, or that it's been caught off guard and not prepared?
Well, I mean, I think, yes, they've been prepared on paper, but this government has a history of preparing on paper, and then when it comes to implementing it, not going so well. So I would say I'd be cautious about saying how well this is going to work in terms of a rollout. But yes, they have been prepared, and they do have, as you mentioned, it's a national system here, more or less. The NHS
Right.
England is the largest. Obviously, there's one in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland as well. However, given the size of England and that it is one national health service, they do have an advantage in that respect over Canada because it is centralized. They do have regions. They can go with these hospital hubs that they're talking about. So on paper, it should be a fairly straightforward rollout, but we'll wait and see how it actually works in practice.
All right. Globe and Mail's Paul Waldie. Paul, always good to talk to you. Thanks for your time tonight.
Okay.
A signature promise of the Liberal government has been broken. The Prime Minister, you'll recall, in 2015, Justin Trudeau promised to end the long-term boil water advisories in First Nations communities by March of 2021. Today, the Minister of Indigenous Services announced that won't happen. Monday's fiscal update promised another $1.5 billion to fulfill the pledge on top of the $2.2 billion the Liberal government's already set aside over the past 5 years to try and fix this problem. Let's bring in Canada's Minister of Indigenous Services, Marc Miller. Mr. Minister, good to see you again. Thanks for being here.
Hi, nice to see you, Peter.
This was one of the most significant promises from the Prime Minister. How come the promise won't be met?
Well, look, I think the scenes that your viewers saw in introduction are unacceptable for any country, in particular Canada, which is, we fancy it as the best country in the world. And I certainly believe it is. But these are regular day occurrences and lived experience on a daily basis for far too many communities in Canada, Indigenous in particular. There's a lot of communities on water advisories, but far too many of them are Indigenous. And we committed in 2015 to lifting them by March 2021. There have been a series of challenges, including COVID, but not limited to COVID, and also the partnership that we've realized with Indigenous communities as they have worked with us to establish their priorities and their timelines. And what I've heard resoundingly as we navigate, obviously, a global pandemic, but also some real infrastructure challenges, challenges with winter roads, increasing costs during COVID, obviously, is the real need for a partnership at long term and not a deadline that was imposed by Ottawa. And while we will be at a handful of communities by spring 2021, if things go well, what we're saying to communities today, and the investment reflects it, is that we are with them for the long term, and that's what they've been asking.
Was the Prime Minister wrong to set that deadline?
Look, what the deadline that the Prime Minister set in 2015 was one that every Canadian expected the person in that position of leadership to say, which is that we will lift these long-term water advisories. And indeed, while it was an ambitious deadline, we've encountered some challenges along the way, including increasing the number of systems that are eligible for our support by 250 in 2018. Now, we were optimistic with that challenge deadline until COVID hit, and then I didn't want to be in a position with my team to entirely blame things on COVID when we wanted to give Canadians a full, a truthful rendition of what was going on. Right. So we wanted to take the time to look and see how COVID was impacting.
But you also acknowledged today in the news conference you had that not all of the communities had been consulted before the deadline was set in 2015. Why would you do that? Why would you set a deadline saying, yeah, sure, we can do this, when a bunch of communities weren't even talked to about whether that was realistic or not.
Well, I think, Peter, knowing that there are hundreds of communities in Canada that during the middle of an election, we thought we could realize these things, and indeed we put the resources and financial backing of Canada to bear. But certainly as we moved along that path with Indigenous communities over the last 5 years, we've seen challenges that we've met. But clearly when you look at what communities need and you have to walk that path with them, they wanted a long-term commitment. They said, this is your in part, they said, this is your deadline. We never wanted to be in this situation in the first place. Some communities have been on long-term water advisories for a quarter of a century. So indeed, the entire lifetime, particularly of the youth, not having access to clean water. So this is something that we need to be doggedly resolute in tackling. And the amounts that were announced during the fiscal update on 36 hours ago were ones that reflect the seriousness of this government in working with communities to lift those in the long term.
Okay, so as I understand it now, there's no new deadline to end the remaining advisories on you say it'll be a dozen or so by March. But I'm still, I mean, the Prime Minister imposed a deadline to try and force this to get fixed. So how does no deadline encourage you to make sure that it happens as quickly as possible?
Well, Peter, we're bringing all resources to bear to ensure, one, that composing with COVID, that communities have the support to ensure that those key essential service infrastructure projects can have all the supports of Canada to meet that deadline. The position I want to be in spring of 2021 is down to a handful of communities that we will be able to give, if the communities permit, detailed timelines as to when we expect that boiled water advisory to be lifted. What we need to understand behind this are people and crews and communities that are working really hard to lift, in some cases, these advisories that have been along for decades. And that is something that we'll continue to do. Ideally, I would like to be in a position where I could give to Canadians in the spring an expected lift date. But again, there's a lot of things that need to fall into place over the course of the next few months, including, I believe, the lifting of about another 20 by the end of December, so that we can get into the spring with really just a handful of unique circumstances that we will tackle in partnership with.
Very quickly, you talked today about that. You know, it was an Ottawa imposed timetable and an Ottawa imposed deadline that not all First Nations ended up agreeing with that timetable. That and not all of them have lifted the boil water advisories or wanted them lifted. Explain why they wouldn't want the boil water advisory lifted if they could get it lifted.
Well, I would say, Peter, the vast majority of communities take great pride in lifting those boiled water advisories. There are some that have said to us, you know, what happens once we lift it? Do you just disappear? Where's the partnership to supporting the operations and the maintenance of these state-of-the-art facilities, knowing that their operators perhaps get paid less than in non-Indigenous communities, and so the risk of these things falling back into short and then long-term advisories is very significant. And also there have been some connected infrastructure projects that communities want to see as prioritized. And this investment gives Canada the opportunity to provide the financial backing to these communities so that they, in turn, can work really hard and do all the work they need to lift those advisories. Again, as we get down to really the short strokes, cases in communities each community is unique, but each has its way of working with us and ensuring that these advisories are lifted.
All right. Indigenous Services Minister Marc Miller, thanks for your time today. Good to speak with you.
Thank you, Peter.
And that's all the time we have for this edition of Primetime Politics from all of us here at CPAC. Thanks for watching. See you next time.